Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody, especially those of you who are presidents, I guess. It is your day today, President's Day, so I don't know. Go do something presidential, I guess. Happy President's Day to everybody but the previous president, the guy who was last president, who now seeks the job again and doesn't care whether he gets elected to the job or not, just going to try and seize it. So, screw you. You're hardly worth mentioning. However, he's the bulk of the news because, of course, he won't just go away. Remember, by the way, when it was a horrible thing for Hillary Clinton to even, take a walk in the woods and have anybody notice that? Why won't she just go away? Anyway, well, that's par for the course. Now, of course, the obsession is, what about Biden? He aged by a day since we told you about how old he was yesterday. That's very concerning, isn't it? And no word about the guy who thought that the Continental Army took over the airports. Okay, whatever. Anyway, lots going on today. President's Day happening. I suppose it's time to go get a mattress. It's always time to go get a mattress, really. They have a sale for just about everything. And here we are. And congratulations to George Washington, who had the foresight to be born on a Monday every year, which is terrific for all of us who get the day off, and not so terrific for the rest of us. I guess mattress salesmen and everybody else who has to work because it's not really celebrated as a major holiday. But if you work for the federal government, you are in luck. Except, minus the fact that you work for the federal government, which sometimes kind of sucks. All right. What was the big news this weekend? I don't know. I guess it depends how you look at it. Could it have been that Donald Trump had Judge Engoron's judgment against him in the fraud case handed down on Friday, and so spent the weekend knowing that he owed something like $500 million to people just in the last 2 weeks or so, according to the outcomes of these cases, both the Jean Carroll case and the civil fraud case brought against him in the state of New York. I think it came down to something in the neighborhood of about $350 million worth of fines in New York, but the way it all works, of course, is you gotta put up bonds, and you also have to pay interest on it, like 9% interest ahead of time. So it sounds like it ends up costing him north of $400 million just in that case, plus another $100 million or so in Jean Carroll's case. I think she's just about 80-something million. So, it's quite a bit of money, and that's good news, and I guess that's why he spent Friday, I don't know, at, this is the guy, remember, by the way, we have to delay all of his trials now. We can't put him on trial on the Jack Smith trial or anywhere else because he's too busy now that he's campaigning for president, and a trial being held against him at this point would be election interference because it takes him off the campaign trail. Nonetheless, he spent the weekend in Philadelphia, is that right? At SneakerCon, which is amazing. Just one, that there is one. Two, that Donald Trump would voluntarily show up at anything with the name Con in the title. I mean, that would be ordinarily attractive to him, but I thought maybe somebody would tell him you should stay away from stuff like that. But he has no advisors, as you know. So he went to SneakerCon mostly because, there's only one reason he went there. He has a line of stupid-looking shoes to sell, just like everything else. Trump steaks, Trump water, Trump vodka, Trump everything that nobody needed. He's got one of these. So, of course, the Onion is out of business, as it turns out, because what are his sneakers? They are painted gold. That's right. They took a pair of high tops and they painted them gold. They put a little bit of stars and stripes motif trim around the top. They put a T on the side, and boom, it's Trump sneakers. And they were selling, they're allegedly for sale for $399 a pair. There was something else, too, that he was offering for sale that was equally dumb, and I can't remember what it was, but we'll get to that, no doubt. Somebody, though, bought the first pair produced, autographed by Donald Trump, who's still sort of kind of barely able to write his own name, I guess. And a sneaker collector who no doubt intends to resell the things bought them for about $9,000. So he's still, still the better part of $500 million in hock to just the fines that were handed down last week. He didn't get anywhere with that. Ah, yes. And Greg tells me the other thing he came up with to sell, another thing very unlikely for Donald Trump. He's bottled his scent. Not his scent, because that you can get, outside of any water treatment plant, more or less for free. But somebody made a perfume and they painted the bottle gold and put a T on it. And now it's Trump perfume. They call it Victory 47, I think, or something like that, because running for president, going to be the 47th president because the 46th president kicked his ass and booted him out of the White House. Now to come back again, you get another number, which I'm sure he's upset about. He wants to just be 45 all over again. Anyway, more useless crap. And surprising no one, his company, which he's now banned from running, that was another interesting development over the weekend. I mean, we knew that was coming. Engoron was going to ban him and his family members as part of the fraud judgment against him from running any companies incorporated in New York, which is, great. He's past the need for running a company at this stage of the game, but we might as well eliminate that from the board if we can. Some strangely almost sympathetic writing about it I saw in the Washington Post, just sort of saying something like, for the first time in decades, or really in almost a century, since the beginnings of what became the Trump Organization, the company will be without a Trump at the helm, which, as though that was some sort of terrible thing. It's in fact a fantastic thing, even for the Trump Organization itself, quite honestly. They've run it mostly into the ground in the last 50 plus years. Trump's dad was the last guy who had it as a profitable enterprise. And then since then, the last 25 years, they haven't sold anything that was a core product of the company. It was really mostly about licensing Trump's name to places and then painting stuff that nobody wanted or needed gold and putting a T on it and saying, now there's a Trump steak. There's now a Trump scent. There's a Trump vodka, a Trump lemonade, whatever whatever you want to. It's just nonsense. And the idea that, there's not going to be a Trump running the Trump Organization. I don't know why anybody thought that was supposed to be of interest. So lots going on, lots to catch up with. You may have seen in the national news. I don't know. It depends on how deeply you read into the national news and whatnot. But you may have read that my town exploded over the weekend. A house in my town exploded at any rate, and it made national news as somebody had a leak in the gigantic 500-gallon propane tank that they have to heat their pool, which, don't do it, I guess. But enormous explosion in town. Absolutely felt it in this house. Was pretty sure somebody had, dropped a crate of bowling balls in the upstairs bedroom or something. But we don't have that. And we were unable to find anything that had made that thumping noise. We thought a bookcase maybe had fallen over or something. And once we became convinced that it hadn't happened in our house, we went outside to ring the doorbell on the next door neighbor's house. Did something fall over in your house? We're in townhomes, so it's possible. But on our way to the door, we ran into everybody else in the neighborhood who was outside looking at their roofs saying, did I just get hit by a meteor? What was that? And that convinced us that it wasn't one of our houses, but in fact, 2 miles away, a house blown to matchsticks. Really tragic. And as it turns out, the worst kind of disaster for a suburban town. The local volunteer fire department had been called for the report of the gas leak, and they went down in the basement to shut it off. And while they were down there, it blew up, and they got trapped in the basement. One volunteer firefighter, was killed in this explosion, and I think 11 others sent to the hospital. It was really something. So, hoping for full recovery for those who were badly injured, and what can you say? Comfort and support for those who lost their family member. And I don't think I know the person. It's not that kind of a small town where everybody knows everybody, but The volunteer fire department, that's your neighbors. It's amazing that anybody volunteers to do that job, but we thank them for doing it. All right. Well, Greg's been sending me all that. Each of those noises is an example of an attractively decorated above ground 500-gallon propane tank. They're fairly common and often in rural areas. Suburban areas, you tend to see them buried, and like I said, they supply heat for a pool or a sauna or some sort of luxurious appurtenance to your home. In rural areas, I don't know what the hell it looks like they warm up cows, because they're painted as cows. Watermelons, a very attractive watermelon one. Generators, right? True. Do they power your generator, Greg? Good morning. How are you, by the way? And how are you feeling about the presidents today?
Today is mattress day, so I have to keep that in mind. These 500
you got one for your generator?
500-gallon propane tanks, which generally hold around 400 gallons. Oh. You put less in because
yes.
Heat expands it, so you can't really fill it up to max.
Well, this one really expanded a lot.
Yeah, and when they expand
rapidly.
Very quickly, it generally takes the house with you, so that's bad.
Yeah. Luckily, no other houses taken with debris and damage, etc. But yeah, all the kids around the neighborhood who talk to my kids via computer, etc., reporting that they could see the flames in many cases, a couple of broken windows in their houses, the interior walls flexed. It was really something.
Right. So basically, if you smell gas, call 911. Do not pass go. Do not collect
did the right thing.
Don't try to fix it yourself. Get the heck out of there.
Well, the residents of the home did do just that, and the fire department saved them. That was the purpose of them. And then, of course, they had to go and risk their own life and limb trying to save the rest of the neighborhood. It's really quite amazing. It's hard to believe that when you have a tragedy like this, hard to believe that anybody would say, I'll do this voluntarily. But, for the most part, they're the everyday heroes putting out kitchen fires that could take your house with it if you're not, if it wasn't for the fact that there are people volunteering. I know how to put these out, and I'll be there in 5 minutes. Hold on.
Right. So these are pretty ubiquitous. Out where I live, we use them to power generators, and they're all over the place. Everybody has one.
I ever see all these decorations. They're very nice.
Yeah, and so there's a folk art thing about decorating them, and there's all sorts of different ways to prettify them. We just have one. But there's also rules about what kind of paints you can put on them. They have to be certain colors. They can't be other colors. You can't make them so that they're painted black because they heat up, and that's bad.
Yeah.
So all sorts of connections to them. And so when I heard about this thing blowing up, of course, the first thing I did is go outside and see if I could smell any gas.
Yeah. Right.
And,
I worried
I've been
me.
doing that for a couple of days now. And no, you can't.
No, well, they're pretty sound, and I imagine they make them to pretty exacting standards. The fact that this one was buried, I guess, suburban life demands burial.
That surprised me because I wasn't aware of that. But
it seems like how do you? Yeah, but if it's leaking, what now? I can't dig it up. It seems dangerous, but I guess they just don't leak that often, and I guess that's standard suburban practice. No, that's pretty
unusual for them to leak.
So, anyway, this one did, and
we haven't had anything blow up in our neighborhood in days.
Right, just tannerite. That's just the locals having fun, though.
Anyway, so it's President's Day and a whole bunch of stuff going on because there's always a whole bunch of stuff going on. I'm going to start with something a little unusual.
Oh, well, all right.
But because it's state, you might think of it as local, but it actually has ramifications above and beyond about what's going on with life around here.
All right.
Okay, and this one is about Wisconsin.
All right.
And it's a piece by Dan Schaefer in his Substack, which he calls the Recombobulation Area. Nice name.
All right.
About why Tony Evers should sign the maps. Now, what are the maps?
Yeah, what are they?
We spent a whole lot of time trying to make sure that Wisconsin voted for Biden, but also that the Supreme Court in Wisconsin, Wisco, Skowis, however you want to call it, didn't overly favor Republicans by putting Janet Protasevich there. We had a long campaign to try to get her to win. She did. Then the Supreme Court of Wisconsin decided to take up the radical gerrymandering maps because the Republicans there under Scott Walker had made it so that only Republicans could win. They did so. The Republicans wanted her to recuse. She didn't. They threatened all sorts of stuff, which never happened. And finally, the court said, no, you know what? These maps really are gerrymandered. You got to do new ones.
They were. It was one of the worst in the country, as I recall.
Yeah, I mean,
in terms
Ohio's
of the imbalance it created.
And there's other places that are pretty bad, but this was bad.
Yeah, they were the ones that had. I mean, the results were so terrible. I don't know what the map looked like, but in the end, it was Democrats were winning a majority of the votes and getting a minority of the seats by a huge margin.
Right. So as Dan writes, Tony Evers is now facing one of the most important decisions he'll make in his time as governor. The decision before him is whether to sign or veto maps passed by the Republican-controlled state legislature. These are proposed by Evers himself as part of a process initiated by the Wisconsin Supreme Court when its 4-3 majority struck down the state's legislative maps as unconstitutional in December 2023. Evers said he'd sign a bill with these maps if they passed them and sent them to his desk, and he has until Tuesday, February 20th. That's tomorrow.
Write this down, everyone.
Right?
Yeah.
Ding. And so the question is, what does he do? He probably signs them, and people are asking, but should he? So on its face, Dan writes, it's a question with a simple answer. These are maps he proposed, maps that are fair, as the expert report determined, and maps he said he would sign. So maybe that's just what will happen, and there's really no story here. But the decision isn't as simple as it might seem. And that not being simple is really what I want to hone in on here.
All right.
You see, door number 1, he writes, is to sign them, and door number 2 is to veto them. But waiting behind each door is a legal black box that exists, and nobody's quite aware of what's in it. And malignant attorneys with spurious motivations will play their own version of legal Calvin ball, where they make up their own rules as they go along to determine what's inside those black boxes. And let's pause for a moment to recognize how unspeakably irritating this is. And by the way, the reason I'm doing this piece is because it also explains how irritating politics feels right now to all of us.
Yes, well, okay.
And how difficult it becomes for everyday people to understand what's actually happening. Redistricting, to be sure, is a topic that's deep in the weeds, but that doesn't mean it shouldn't be nearly indecipherable for even some of the most attentive observers. You can say the same thing about how the House works, discharge petitions and defeat the previous question, all that sort of stuff. It seems reflective of how, on so many levels, he writes, the machinations of the political legal system seem specifically crafted to box people out of the process and relegate the only true decision-making ability to a protected class that'll never feel the true consequences of their choices. And that's true.
It does feel that way.
It's really bothersome.
And it does happen that way very frequently because even though there are mechanisms available to break through, they're troublesome and vexing, and you have to spend a lot of time studying how to affect your own life. That's not the way it's supposed to be.
Right. So these black box calculations now being made behind the scenes appear to come down to which door to walk through and which one invites the most legal risk for the decision to be undone by the absurdity of the American legal system.
Yes.
Yes. I mean, it's just everything about it. And this is Wisconsin, but it's writ large what's going on with Trump trials and regulation and how the Supreme Court looks at the EPA, everything. So earlier this week, in the immediate wake of the bill being passed, there were concerns over a section of the bill applying to special or recall elections. That's been taken care of.
All right. I didn't even get to know what the problem was, but it's taken care of already.
So we don't even need to worry about that.
I hope.
But even with those concerns assuaged, some believe that Evers signing the maps invites greater risk for them to be challenged in federal court in the Seventh Circuit, which is overseen by Dianne Sykes, a conservative-leaning justice on Donald Trump's shortlist for an appointment to the U.S. Supreme Court. So he highlights the fact that when you talk about courts these days, first you have to say, okay, who appointed them?
Right.
Ridiculous.
Yeah.
I mean,
Not supposed to have
be
to
fair and impartial and, without fear or favor and all this, that. No, yeah, that's all nice. Well, like, who appointed you?
Right. Now we have
especially
to do that.
Especially true in Wisconsin, which is totally partisan. But I'm not talking about state courts now. I'm talking about federal court.
Yeah. Well, yes, this is now a consideration. Always has to be part of the calculus. And, in the old rules-based order, it was pretty, the whole legal profession was about, well, okay, I mean, I know what the state of the law is. I know what's been decided lately. I know what the reasoning is. I know who's doing the deciding. It's, you can pay us, the experts, to tell you, well, we're pretty sure we'll come out about this way. We can tinker with it at the margins and maybe get a better outcome, but that's what it's all about. As opposed to now, like, I don't know. They might decide,
said, but then
the founders
they just did this crazy thing.
Yeah.
Like they just threw out precedent for 50 years and said, yeah, but it's because I feel like it. It's the outcome I want.
Right. This is not, I've been against this thing since forever, so forget it. Yeah.
So, basically, if this thing is too long to read, if Evers signs it, it runs a risk of going to the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals on ginned-up charges because who knows what they'll do.
Mm-hmm.
Or he can veto it, in which case, if he vetoes it, then the Republicans will take it to the Supreme Court. And either way, they'll try to use the federal court system to completely overturn what the Wisconsin Supreme Court did, which is to say this is a ridiculous gerrymander and it cannot stand. Now, Dan Schaefer's view is, the best thing to do is just sign it. Get rid of the drama. A lot of this stuff's not going to happen. Overblown worries. And we'll have a system which is relatively fair. And one of the reasons people in Wisconsin on the Democratic side are getting really upset about the idea that why are you going to sign something that was given to you by the Republican legislature is because they don't trust Robin Vos and the Republicans because they figure everything he does has a trick and a poison pill in it. And Dan Schaefer says, well, but don't take that too far. Robin Vos would like you to think he's a super genius who has hidden meaning in everything. And, like in this case, it's probably just not true.
I don't know. I mean, I'm not from Wisconsin. I've certainly heard the name a lot, but never in any I'm just not from Wisconsin.
Well,
so
he's the one that's
not in a context of
engineered the
genius.
gerrymandering.
But
in effect, he's just representative of the state Republicans.
Yeah, that doesn't take any special genius to say, you know what, we should get someone who has special genius to draw me some districts that I can endorse from a partisan standpoint. That doesn't necessarily mean he knew what the hell he was doing. Right. When he said that this one is the map that I really like. I don't know, but maybe he has it.
So Dan Schaefer says, look, for Vos and the state Republicans, they could be passing Evers maps out of a position of weakness, a position they found themselves in after losing control of the executive and judicial branches of the state, which is true. They used to control everything. Now they only control the legislature. They lose the gerrymander. That's capitalized. A monumental shift as the gerrymander has been Republican skeleton key to wielding power in Wisconsin no matter who wins.
Right.
But then adopt a map that consultants determined to be the most favorable to Republicans of the remaining options, a point reiterated by expert nonpartisan research from Marquette University's John Johnson. Perhaps even more importantly, adopting the Evers map would allow Republicans to protect against the possibility of a Democratic trifecta after the next election, which other maps give you, but not the Evers map, which is why Democrats are a little upset about it. Same thing you'll see in New York State.
Yes.
New York State tried to pass something that was really fair, and the Democrats said, we don't want fair. We want to make up for the fact that they screwed us, and we want to screw them back. Well, and why shouldn't we?
Yeah.
And
it's hard
let's
not
not go overboard with it. We don't want to screw them too much, but we certainly want to screw them more than what they just gave us.
Yeah.
So that's
always a temptation. Yeah, well, this is an issue that arose in Colorado's redistricting too, as I recall. The mandate that there be, I mean, it's a weird topic, but the mandate that things be fair. Some people's idea of fair was, well, we should make as many districts as close to 50-50 as possible and make every district a toss-up, and that way it's always competitive.
Yeah.
But, as was pointed out when we heard about this from Travis, that in some of the recorded segments that he sent from his own podcast, was it like 2, 3, 4 years ago now? I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, there are some areas where it's, 60, 70% Democratic voters. Why are we going to bring in Republicans from the far-flung exurbs to balance out an area that's, very, very solidly Democratic and is going to want to elect Democrats and have a right to do it? It doesn't necessarily make that much sense, but the assumptions you begin with when you can't even agree on, well, what do you mean by fair districts?
Right.
How do
So
you
Dan writes, this is where I
that?
believe Democrats to a certain extent are playing with fire. Other maps might be more advantageous to them, and that's true. They could have a map that gives them a path to their first trifecta in a generation. The extent to which that could upend politics is incalculable. And for those whose job it is to elect more Democrats, it might make more sense to advocate to hold out for a more advantageous map. But the differences between the Evers map and the other three aren't all that great. The court-appointed consultants call the four options nearly indistinguishable. The average partisan bias between the Evers map and the others is like 0.5%. The difference between the Evers map and the legislative Republican map is 13%.
Okay.
So,
that's
it's fair, and he should just sign the maps.
Okay. Yes, and if he won't, then maybe Tinkers or Chance will sign the maps. That's possible. Just in case you're, of Montgomery Burns' era. I don't know.
Well,
somehow that brings that to mind for me.
That's a Hall of Fame comment.
Well, second baseman for the Cubs in the 1900s. Everybody knows who that was, right? Okay. Maybe not. Hi, everybody. It's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and Patreon.com, Patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, Patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. It's the morning of July 1910, apparently. I don't know how that got in my head. It just that's what the name Evers means to me, although.
So we started talking about Tinkers to Evers to Chance, the people that perfected the double play back in 1910 or so. Mm-hmm. And they're famous. They're Hall of Fame famous.
Yes.
It comes from an era when the Cubs were good.
Yeah,
like
the first time around, right? And so in case you're, under 400 years old, right? You might not ring a bell, but that was a famous poem. A New York Giants fan, baseball Giants, now San Francisco, lamenting losses to the Cubs because of this fantastic double play factory. So there you go. That happened. And like I said, C. Montgomery Burns was probably irked, or I don't know, maybe he was a fan.
Which leads me to this next piece I want to talk about, written by Thomas Emmer, because it captures a lot of the discussion that happened over the weekend.
All right.
which is the Biden too old discourse. And he writes a column in his
there.
Substack called Democracy Americana, what the Biden too old discourse is really about.
Okay.
Let's talk about the actual arguments. And he makes some important points. The first one that he makes is Biden too old has been with us since at least 2020. It always lurks. It comes up in irregular intervals. It dominates the discussion. The fact we're all talking about it's never prevented people from demanding liberals stop silencing anybody who dares to bring up the issue. People complain about that, but we're talking about the issue all the time, so that's BS.
Yes.
We've been talking about it for 4 years.
Yeah, he was
Okay?
old when
And
he ran.
what's really interesting is that when you go back and look at the columnists who are writing about Biden being too old,
By the way, they're older now, too.
none of them are Biden supporters.
Oh.
For the liberals,
golly,
basically, these are
who is?
Warren people with the occasional Bernie person.
Oh, who's
Right?
also
Gazza
not at
Klein
all
was
old.
like, I miss Elizabeth Warren. I wish Elizabeth Warren, I wish, she would. Well, look,
Yeah,
I mean,
you had your chance.
it's Biden. Biden won. You
Yes,
were all the
I'm
people who
sorry.
kept saying, oh, Biden's doomed. Biden has no chance. Look what happened to Biden in New Hampshire. Biden's out. Biden couldn't win Iowa. And then Biden cleaned up in South Carolina because regular, meaning the rank and file Democrats said, this is the guy we want.
Yeah.
So there's a lot
I
of
won't
that.
tell you.
Of course, on the right, it's really interesting. A lot of the never-Trumpers, like Bill Kristol, who want Biden to drop out because he's too old, really are trying to push Nikki Haley as if she's something good.
Yeah.
Haley just said over the weekend, I won't say that I'll vote for Trump, but I will say that if I'm elected, I'll pardon him.
That's enough for me.
That's enough for me, too. So we understand where they're coming from, too. So you have to understand the motivations here. Just like you have to understand the motivations of unnamed Democratic consultants who we asked to comment on this article, because these are unnamed consultants that don't work for the Biden administration because they were turned down.
Yeah. Yes, you did mention that.
I mean, that's like a ton of the stuff that appears in our not particularly liberal news media, which is being incredibly unhelpful here. So what Thomas Zimmer writes, and he's writing from a leftist perspective, I hate writing about this, he said. The Biden too old discourse is extremely frustrating, exhausting. It's a minefield. It's impossible to navigate without making people angry. Right? Sounds like, Israel Gaza. To some in the Biden camp, any criticism that focuses on questions of age and fitness is part of a bigoted ageist campaign and a hit job. On the other side, critics regard Democrats holding on to someone they see as manifestly unfit as disastrous. And for centrist and center-right commentators, specifically, any pushback against the way Biden's age is publicly discussed is just more evidence of how silly Democrats are, how irrational and unreasonable the whole center-left and liberal, ecosystem is. And many on the left are angry because they feel like they were promised in 2020 that the path to defeating fascism was to support Biden, but then the liberal power center didn't hold up its end, and they didn't transition from Biden to somebody more capable yet.
What?
And then you have people online
no.
saying he promised us he was only going to serve one term. He never did.
Oh.
That was never part of anything he ever said anywhere except in your head.
That's a problem. Okay. And of course, had he said it and then said, actually, that's a bad idea, what are you going to do? But he didn't even say it, so okay.
So he says, quite possibly against my better judgment, let's talk about this. There's generally speaking two different dimensions to consider. First, the broader dynamic governing mainstream media coverage of Biden's age. The question is how to explain the editorial decisions that lead to a completely disproportionate fixation on this one issue, turning it into but her emails.
All right.
And I'm not even going to do that because it's stupid, and so many people have pushed back on that already. I don't have to.
Okay.
So therefore, I want to concentrate on a different dimension, which is the substance.
All right.
Where's the evidence presented, and what are the arguments? Do they hold up to scrutiny? Is it that he's too old to function? Is it that he's too old to be president? Is it He's doing a very good job. Where's the evidence that whatever his situation is somehow stopping him from doing his job? Where is the evidence for that? And where is the evidence that people who actually speak to him, be it Republicans like Kevin McCarthy or Romney, who say, I was with him, he's sharp, or neutral journalists like John Harwood, who said, I interviewed him, he's pretty sharp. You know, so where's the evidence that he's too old to function and that he's lost something or that he's doddering or that he's senile, whatever it is you want to say? Where's the evidence for that? And he's just, there isn't any. And so basically what people have done is say, oh, look at the polls. The polls do not show him 10 points ahead. Therefore, he's not doing as well as he should be. Therefore, that's because he's too old.
Okay. I mean,
and that's supposed to be able to your bench assumption, whether you say it or not. Where's the evidence for that? Firstly, it's not even clear he's not doing that well. Basically, all the polls are tied. There's a new one out today from Lord Ashcroft, actually, saying that Biden and Trump are tied, and Biden is way ahead of Haley.
All right.
That's not the narrative. Everybody knows if Haley were to run, she'd clean up the floor with him. In fact, there's a New York Times article that says, Democrats acknowledge behind the scenes that Haley would, be beating, but that's not true. It's nonsense. It's garbage. First of all, if Haley actually were the nominee, all of the MAGA people would either stay home or form a third party. Haley can't win with that. So the idea Haley's in a better position to beat Biden is just flat out stupid, which somebody who just doesn't understand politics would push. And somebody who doesn't understand politics would accept. It's simply not true. And by the way, the polls don't even show that.
Okay. Well,
I just thought I would point that out.
I mean, that is your thing. These don't say that. Oh, well, yeah, we could imagine that they did.
Yeah, you could imagine that Biden promised to only serve one term.
Right.
So
hell, you can imagine
Thomas
he's 50.
Zimmer is saying is that, look, a lot of this Biden too old stuff is actually conflating like a bunch of different things and then somehow saying, and it must be because Biden's too old.
Yeah, okay.
That's like
I
saying,
can see how that
all right,
comes
I don't like Biden about this, I don't like Biden about that, and there's this other thing I've never liked Biden for, and it's all because he's from Delaware.
That would make some sense.
What?
I would get behind that one.
It's because I've been telling you for years he's from Delaware, and I checked, and he's still from Delaware.
No, he's like 15. I don't understand what you guys are saying.
I understand what you're saying.
Oh, but
it's
he's
English.
from Delaware.
They are words, but you put them together, they don't make any sense.
Yeah. No, that is true. Well, we've been through this before in other contexts. Just stuff that, I don't know, there's a vibe happening and people believe it and you say it and there's some weird new twist to the words. So you just go along with like 20 years ago. Well, you can't listen to that guy. He's a blogger. He writes what he wants to say on a blog. Yeah, well, what's the difference? I mean, that's the communication method. Does this make any sense to say? That doesn't make any sense. The guy told me that over the telephone.
Right. What? So Zimmer goes on to say, remember, he's coming from a leftist perspective.
Okay.
So, look, what do I think about this? Let me give you my own personal views. I think Biden's too old.
Then what were you wasting my time with, Tom?
But does that mean that the Biden too old people are right? Not so fast.
Oh.
Look.
See?
First of all, unless it's just bigotry, fitness is not the same thing as age. Unless I'm completely misunderstanding the state of our knowledge around aging, my general assumption is there's a greater risk of affliction that diminish our abilities as we get older. But until at some point, you can't function. Has he reached that point? If on the ability fitness front, the case is as clear as some people say, I'm sure they have good evidence for it, right? Right? No, they don't have any. And second, while all the available evidence tells us that as of right now, Biden might be considered broadly unpopular, the Biden too old critics tend to jump too quickly from there to, that's because he's old. That's because people won't vote for him. And we don't know that, and none of that is true.
Okay.
A lot of people held their nose and voted for Biden in 2020, and he won.
That's true.
And why would you think that's not true now? He's running against the same person they were holding their nose against.
That is equally true. That's another thing, right? Well, why should we believe he could beat Trump? I don't know. The previous beating of Trump, maybe.
Right?
Yeah, well, that's a good point.
So it's not
But now they're older.
completely a media creation.
Yeah.
But the takeaway here shouldn't be to dismiss Biden's unpopularity or steadfastly claim his lack of popularity doesn't have anything to do with age or lack of fitness. But I'd say there's some questions to grapple with that go well beyond, look at the polls.
Okay. All right.
So what's the way forward? What is your alternative?
Oh, me? I don't know.
I mean, what's the off-ramp? What's supposed to happen? Somebody else would jump in? It's actually pretty much too late, except in a handful of states, to even get on the ballot.
That's true.
Keep
not
that
that
in mind
stop
with Robert
theorizing.
Kennedy, who isn't on the ballot.
Okay. Yes, and I'm grateful.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that doesn't stop speculation.
So Ezra Klein over the weekend says, well, all you have to do is just let Biden win his 96% of people actually voting in these primaries.
Yeah.
Which is what he's doing.
And then undo it.
Then go to the convention. And Biden says, okay, I'm not going to run. I release all my delegates. You guys decide what you want.
All right.
That's
should be
the
orderly
solution
and
for getting
easy.
somebody besides Biden. And if it's Harris, then great, she wins. And if it's not, it's somebody else. And then you don't have Biden and we win.
Uh-huh.
Okay, like 1968 didn't happen.
Yeah. Or Tinker's Evers.
Or
like,
even
that
better.
was the last time they did this. Yeah.
Okay. I, writing from a leftist perspective, want democracy, and clearly the people don't want Biden. So what we should do is, rather than let the people who are voting for Biden, like 96%, have the choice in these primaries, a better way is to set it up so that a small number of people who are elites in the back room decide who's going to be the nominee. That's a much better democratic way.
This is a great idea. I love it. These delegates with these superpowers, what should we call them?
I'm looking at this and thinking to myself, this is really stupid.
Yeah. It's almost as if we had forgotten that, like, maybe 2 elections ago, we decided that, oh, you know what's terrible? These delegates with closed-door superpowers who have extra votes, and it was a huge movement. Got to get rid of superdelegates. And now we're going to say, you know what? Let's just have all the delegates say, to hell with 96% of you. We're picking another guy. Because the one guy said, go ahead and do it.
So in this really long piece, then Zimmer adds, let's go specific here. And then the best part about this is that he lists some of the columnists who were writing Biden's too old, or didn't like his press conference or this, that, or anything else. And you look at the names here. Bret Stephens, Maureen Dowd, Damon Linker, Ross Douthat. These are the people that felt that Biden was too old. And I'm thinking to myself,
those guys should be
if
delegates.
that's the list, I'm for Biden even more.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's definitely true. In addition to which, but you're in the business of being for the other side, essentially. I mean, a lot of you deny it. Ross, you don't, but the rest of them, what do I need? I don't know. They're infamous for being wrong about most things, and then digging in their heels about it. So I guess we're just not going to convince them that they're wrong here.
Right. So basically, in the end, Zimmer says, a lot of this stuff is just liberal bashing.
Sure.
And Bill Kristol's a perfect example.
He is.
He didn't include him in the article, but he is. Because he's one of the Biden should step down for the good of the country people.
Oh, I see.
What are you saying? What I'm saying, what Bill Kristol is saying, what Bill Kristol is saying, what I'm saying is, you are liberals and can't be expected to make the right choices. And here's another example. I'm telling you, Biden should be better in the polls than he's not. Therefore, you should do what I'm thinking, which is back a center-right person like Nikki Haley, and you're not. I'm really ticked off at you because you're still not listening to me. And so I'm just going to tell you everything you're doing is wrong.
All right.
And I'm going to settle some scores. And I'm thinking to myself, I like Bill Kristol when he's dumping on Trump, but as for the rest of him deciding what the Democratic Party should do, I don't need your advice on that. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not throwing you over the rails of the boat here. I'm not throwing you under the bus. I'm not running a train back and forth over your wilted carcass here. I'm simply saying, vote against Trump, make the case against Trump, leave it there, We'll deal with who we want to run.
Right. I am leaving the bus running, however. I just want you to know.
Just in case you need it.
I will have you tied to the
warmed
street.
Up and ready to go.
Yeah.
Say one more thing, and I'm not going to hesitate.
Bus is on, and you're fastened down in the streat.
I have a bus, and I know how to use it.
And we could just wait here for another couple of years, or yeah. That's true, but we're all used to this. This is an old game for them. I mean, I don't know. Has the term fallen out of favor? I guess everybody's been more overt in their writing these days. We haven't talked about the old phenomenon of concern trolling, but yeah, that's for decades.
This is.
That was
a lot of this, all of this stuff.
That was Republicans
really
writing.
Trolling.
I'm just worried. I think it's good for us to have competitive elections.
Really, it's just that I'm worried about these things.
Right.
And then if it turns out that for some reason Trump wins and Biden loses, I told you so.
Yeah.
And I was right and you were wrong. And I've always said I was right and you were wrong. It's part of who I am, and I can't get it out of my system. And so I'm doing it now.
All right. Yeah. Well, there's a lot of good points made there. And, one of them is, I don't know, we've become used to in our vibe elections that the president of the United States should be a vigorous, active, vibrant kind of person. And that was not always the case. And it's not actually necessary. We've forgotten about the old wizened heads and, wisdom coming with age kind of a thing. That used to be a thing. But then, I don't know. Then George W. Bush started jogging or whatever, and everybody had, I don't know. Well, it wasn't just him. But, yeah, youthful vigor is the idea. It's a tough job, to be sure. But, well,
again, we go back to that
it's a mental job.
On the bus thing. I sent you the whole sketch, by the way. I don't know if you ever got it, but it's available on YouTube. You can hear the whole sketch.
Right.
Where there's a computer president, and that's the image of what people want, and the real president is actually something completely different.
Yeah, it's a tough job, and it's more than the sum of the video of press conferences. But there was a time when people thought
Governor
you could point
Shapiro
and
of Pennsylvania. Who everybody acknowledges is a young, rising Democratic star politician.
Or old,
has
too
a message
old.
For all of you.
Possibly. Yes?
It's going to be a close race, so stop worrying and start working.
Oh. Boring. Yeah, it sounds like an old guy. He's like 90. How old is he?
I don't know.
I don't know either. Josh Shapiro?
Josh Shapiro. He's like, 14.
Yeah, there's no old Joshes. I don't think.
So, Dan Pfeiffer has a message in his Substack, which he calls the message box. I just love all the different names for these verticals here. You know what Substack is? Substack is blogging. You remember blogging. We used to do it together.
But
it's
somehow
just that
Nazis
this is
got
blogging,
money
except
from
you
it.
get paid.
Yeah, somebody does. Not everybody.
Which isn't what we used to do. We
right.
used to
decidedly not an element of traditional blogging.
So the message box, how to make Trump's fraud verdict matter to voters. Dan Pfeiffer says it does matter. And what matters is how you talk about it. This is a messaging thing.
Okay.
So he's been declared a fraud by the state of New York, and here's how you talk about it.
All right. Yes.
Be clear about what Trump did. What he was found guilty of is lying to banks and insurance companies to line his own pockets with hundreds of millions of dollars. This was a fraud trial.
Yes.
I've said that many times.
Yes.
He committed fraud. He's guilty. He has to pay a lot of money because of it.
Yeah. And the money it's money that they're taking out of his pockets because it was stolen. That's important too. Yes. All right.
Number 2, connected to the kind of president Trump will be. Electing somebody found guilty of fraud and sexual assault would be a non-starter, but you got to say it this way. Can we really trust somebody guilty of massive financial fraud and banned from doing business in New York to protect consumers from corporations that price gouge?
I feel like no is the answer to that, although I'm not that super motivated by it, but I am glad that it's out there.
To me, it's even worse. What kind of president will Trump be? Trump will be a security risk president.
Right. Because
Saudi Arabia and or Russia or Elon Musk or whoever buys Clarence Thomas will feel like they can buy Trump too. All I got to do is pay his bills.
Sure.
Work for Kavanaugh.
Oh, yeah. True. Right. It's been a great point over the last couple of days is a now impoverished Trump getting his hands on more national security secrets that can be sold, and he has to raise enormous amounts of cash to pay fines or just to live. He'll do anything, which he would have done anyway. That's true. We could have avoided this whole conflict and just said he's a greedy, disgusting grubber. And
make it part of number 3 of a larger narrative. And the larger narrative is,
there you go.
Don't give me this stuff about, New York is biased against Trump. New York knows Trump and hates him. That's not the same thing as being biased against him.
True.
They just happen to, as a matter of fact, know who he is. But as Pfeiffer describes what Navigator research polling reveals, these investigations were conducted by law enforcement people. The decision to bring the indictments were made by career prosecutors. They were approved by a jury of Donald Trump's peers. And no politician is above the law. A jury will render a judgment in each case, but Trump shouldn't return to the White House because he's more focused on protecting himself, helping his rich, connected friends, and punishing his enemies than lowering costs, raising wages, or protecting your family. I mean, basically, you want to talk about kitchen table issues? Donald Trump wants to save himself from going to jail. He's not the least bit interested in what's in your refrigerator and how much it costs.
Right. Unless your refrigerator is a golden Trump refrigerator, in which case he also doesn't care about you. Just that you paid him for the fridge.
And then Pfeiffer adds, the verdict is a reminder that Trump is more politically vulnerable than the prevailing narrative suggests, and it's imperative to frame the election as a choice between a decent, experienced man who cares about you and a chaotic criminal. And so, for those of you who say that, this is one of those situations where they're giving us a choice between two evils. No, only one of them is evil.
Yeah.
It's not a choice between two evils. Biden is not evil. Not. And you can't make that case. It doesn't work.
Not that that's stopping people from trying, but when they do, it's typically, quite honestly, on a subject on which, the greater evil is still the other guy. Because that's true on almost everything. I can't think of a situation in which, one is, unless old is evil. Well, he's 1 year older than the other one, so he's more evil.
Well, but a lot of this is, when you get down to it, is Biden is trying to do something good, but in my view, he hasn't succeeded yet. Therefore, he's evil.
Yeah. That's pretty evil versus this guy is a rapist
this guy's
and
actually
stole
trying
money.
To do evil things and says he's going to do even more evil things.
Yeah.
Well, you're asking me to choose between these two. Yeah. Well, why is this hard?
Yeah. I look. This isn't my favorite choice. I didn't ask you to make this choice because I wanted to vex you. You're making this choice because this is what's been presented to us. Could it have come out differently? Yep, sure. Organize, go for it. Give us another candidate, run in the primaries. Nobody did? All right. Sorry. Now what?
So what's happening in the meantime to help frame these things? Right. And these are all framing, incident 2 with the major decision being Biden versus Trump. Well, we got a bunch of legal cases that are going to, come to a head soon. As soon as tomorrow,
what
the Supreme Court could tell us about whether or not they grant a stay. Because they're doing orders. And then on Wednesday, they're doing cases, which means we could, hear about the Colorado you're off the ballot case, which everybody expects the Supreme Court to decide in Trump's favor. He can stay on the ballot.
I don't know about whether that's we're going to see it so soon.
If those two things happen, the more important one is no stay means yes trial. By the end of the week, because I think today there's a behind doors discussion with McAfee about Fani Willis's situation, and then closing remarks at the end of the week, and by next week, beginning of next week, we can find out what's going on with that. If Fani Willis is found to be, this is really interesting, but it's got nothing to do with Georgia law, which says you have to be disqualified for certain things that this hasn't proven, and she stays on the case. If that, in fact, what happens, then the case goes ahead. Same thing with if there's no stay on Chutkan, then the Jack Smith January 6th case goes ahead. And if those two cases come to trial, because the other two unclear, the New York case may, but people aren't taking it as seriously. The Mar-a-Lago, Florida case probably won't come to trial before the election because Aileen Cannon will do everything possible to make sure it doesn't. The other cases, if they do, will change everything because there's a big difference between being accused of something and being convicted of something.
Yes.
And so say the polls. So,
not just the polls.
There's just so much more to come. Again, one of the many, many reasons why polls at this particular point in time can't really tell you what happens, in the future.
Yes.
And it does not tell you what people who really don't want to hear about two candidates they're not particularly thrilled with. Don't ask me to make a decision about this. I'm not ready. I don't even want to hear about it. So, I want to poll you on it. Well, if I answer you at all, just keep in mind, a lot of us aren't answering you, and those that are don't really want these choices. So I don't know what to tell you. Ask me again in October.
Yeah. I mean, right, when I have no choice, I'm either going to vote or not vote. That's when you need to pressure me.
Other background, Biden-Trump adjacent information. This is from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Thought it was interesting. Once reticent, Democrats are again rallying around Fani Willis. They saw her on the stand, said there's nothing here. Let's move on. And then this one from CNN. High-profile Republicans head for the exits amid House GOP dysfunction. People who went to Congress to try to do stuff are looking around saying, I don't want to be part of this. I don't want Marjorie Taylor Greene to be the person who sets the agenda. I'm out of here.
What? Yeah.
I'm only 29 and I'm going to spend more time with my family.
You're so old. You 29-year-olds. Yeah. Right. Well, good. I'm glad you've made that decision. It must be horrible to be there and to realize that the dumbest, craziest people are in charge of setting your work agenda. Who wants to work there? Nobody. That's, well, good. Good. Because, of course, everybody who's not running for re-election, it doesn't make it necessarily an easy win for Democrats in those seats, but an open seat is always easier to pull off a miracle in than one running against an incumbent. Unless the incumbent is arrested. That happens. All right. Well, good and good riddance to most of those people. Marjorie Taylor Greene will not get that hint anytime soon because I guess she's invulnerable, she believes, in her district. She'll just have to be arrested or could be vaporized by a Jewish space laser.
I don't see a lot of coverage of the fact that Trump went to SneakerCon and got booed and everybody started treating Let's Go Biden.
No.
Started chanting.
Not a lot. Oh, I didn't realize that.
I don't see a lot of coverage of that, but that happened.
Well, it was easier to make fun of the gold sneakers. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I'm so old, I can't use this. I can't do this radio thing anymore. I have to stop. Yeah, the age thing, I don't know. Like I said, or we've all said, or we all imagined, it comes out of nowhere, and it's just it's a meme thing, and they think they can use it against Biden, and it sort of kind of resonates, so they're just going to do it even if it doesn't make any particular sense. Zimmer kind of proves that's the case, and as Mighty OCD is commenting here, what about all those pickup games that Reagan dominated, right? I mean, we did live through that, and there was, to really strive to be fair, although, it's not even fairness, but to show that, okay, well, once it happened in the other direction, it's absolutely the case that there was a vibe at the time, like, hey, maybe Reagan's too old. And I think, though, it didn't prevent anything from happening in terms of defeating Reagan's re-election bid. But I do think that it's possible that at some level the Reagan experience is part of what's driving things here. To the extent the Biden's age thing makes any sense to me, even in the face of Zimmer's argument that look, there's just no evidence for it here, is, I think, grows out of the Reagan experience, which is, well, at election time, it didn't appear that it was absolutely, positively, demonstrably the case that there was no way that Reagan at that time, or Biden now, was going to make it all the way through a second term. At a certain age, the risk of having your condition and your faculties turn on a dime increases. Now, they could happen at any time. You could have a stroke at any age, or some catastrophic accident, or a bowling ball does in fact fall on your head, like we thought had happened over the weekend. And that, things will happen. But okay, that's just random chance. At a certain age, you start to wonder, well, now the odds are increasing. And I think what came out of the Reagan experience was either we all knew in 1984 that this was going to happen or had already happened, but the spin machine got in the way of our convincing Republican partisans that this was going to be the case. Or people were just being open-minded to the possibility that an older person could remain in control of their faculties even, beyond a certain age. Even though there was also the issue that no one really believed that Reagan was doing that in the first place. So it really didn't matter. And I guess this also gave rise, oddly enough, to the now the MAGA mantra about the deep state, right? It doesn't matter if the president is elderly. The deep state runs itself anyway. The president's just a figurehead. And we lived with that for a while. But like I say, I think maybe something underlying it is, well, what if it all looks like it's okay, but then things go south in the middle of the term of office? Isn't it the case? Don't we all believe at some level, maybe because, that one kernel of truth that resonates with us from the idea that developed into the deep state was that, advisors will take care of things. I mean, Reagan wasn't the first president to do this or to deal with this. I mean, this happened with several other presidents, Woodrow Wilson, and Franklin Roosevelt. Both sort of famously at some point, debilitated by health issues and had unofficial advisors, let's say, and official and unofficial, who just sort of took care of things. That there's no precedent in this country for declaring the president incapacitated unless it's just completely, he's in a coma, and we don't actually have that precedent. That's a movie. It didn't happen. And even then, the movie was what? Dave, right? The movie, the president's in a coma. Rather than admit that and declare him incapacitated under the 25th Amendment and hand things over to by all accounts in the movie, very honest and hardworking vice president, Nance, as I recall, right? They did everything they could to come up, well, we're going to get a double to pretend to be the president and control him from behind the scenes. And that's a very popular movie. And I guess, I don't know whether it's fair to say people bought into that idea, but the premise, it wasn't like people were saying this is an alien invasion movie. The premise wasn't so dumb that people rejected it. So maybe that's what's going on here, right? As they say, well, the reality is if something were to go wrong and Biden were to become, if not incapacitated, then to have diminished capacities, would we really do the right thing and hand over daily control to someone else? And if so, who would that be? And there's all sorts of reasons to think there would be fights about that. But also, would we do it, or would we just limp along and pretend that everything was okay until the next election came up? And wouldn't then people who were saying now that Biden's too old spend those last 2 years saying, see, I told you so, and being insufferable? Yeah, probably they would. And yeah, probably they would do anything they could to refrain from just handing over control to somebody else, because we've never done it. So that raises fears and doubts and worries, and I think I can understand that. And I think that's really what underlies all of this stuff is, although we have mechanisms in place to deal with it, everything from how to handle the presidency when the president is not at his or her best and yet you don't want to hand over the reins, all the way to, well, we do have contingency plans for what to do if we must hand over the reins. But nobody's particularly comfortable with any of it. The only thing we have any familiarity with is that deeply uncomfortable and maybe not particularly democratic or constitutional idea of, well, let's just see if we can't limp across the finish line by having the president do as little as possible and having everybody else take over, the unelected take over all these things. And then there's a whole other can of worms, which we don't even have to speculate about. Well, we don't have to speculate about it because people have been pretty open about it, is the somewhat discouraging idea that there's a major contingent of Democrats who wouldn't want to trust the system and hand things over to Kamala Harris, which is disturbing in its own right and will raise a whole nother set of issues, which would be absolutely valid to say, I don't understand, we have all these mechanisms in place, and as it turns out, look, the voters have set it up such that the mechanisms, if the ones we've accepted as being the real succession precedents that we've adopted and approved, all point to the first woman president and a woman of color at that, and now you're balking at it. How long have we been walking around with the 25th Amendment, or walking around with the assumption that the vice president takes over in the event of the incapacity of the president? Always. And only now are you really expressing doubts about that? And isn't it really because there's a woman of color who stands to take the reins? And that seems like it's so easy for people who have been, who have identified as Democrats for all this time to say, no, it's something else. It's not that. I'm totally comfortable with that. It's, well, what? We have a really, really uncomfortable silence for a while. And I don't know. I mean, is it that, well, she's not ready for it? She's not really fully prepared for this job? No one's ever fully prepared for this job. It's always a transition for everybody, but she's actually been in the vice presidency for a while. That's better preparation than most. And remember, the alternative was, well, we could maybe limp along with the president of diminished capacity because the system takes care of itself. There's plenty of advisors, people embedded from top to bottom with official capacity and unofficial capacity. They know where the bodies are buried and how to pull the levers. Let's just let them operate government until the next election. Well, do it for the vice president then. That should work for a vice president just as well. Yeah, you're right. That's a good point. Okay, well, there you go. So that's my political science thought for the moment. And now, other stories. And let's go see. What have I parked in pocket for your consideration? Here's something. I don't know whether I'll spend time reading it or not because it's something you should read on the outside. It's President's Day, and we all know what underlies that. And George Washington, the mythos of George Washington, anyway. The New York Times has an interesting article today about how, well, actually, I guess at bottom, this is about the evolution in the way we think of the founders because, of course, we're actually, examining history critically and looking at the lives of the enslaved and how essential they were to how the country was formed in a number of ways. The most obvious and most frequently discussed being, well, the physical structure of the country, the infrastructure of the country, and everything else was, one, built by enslaved people. So let's, be honest about that. But also, when I say the structure of the country, the mythos of the founders, the great thinking that they were doing, all the inventing that Thomas Jefferson was doing, all the theorizing that he was doing, all the wonderful things that we attribute to the other founders, etc. A lot of them, how could they? Why don't we have thinkers like that today? Where are our founders, or what have you? And of course, well, it may be that they were a unique breed of person or generation of people, but it may also have been that they were pampered and taken care of from morning to night by enslaved people. And even if they weren't enslaved, they were, but had there been no such thing as slavery, an extraordinarily rich upper class of people, they were able to pay servants. They didn't have to because they had enslaved people. But anyway, and the idea basically was, well, I'm free to do all this great thinking all the time because do I need meals to live? Yes, fine. Enslaved people, make me some meals, and procure that food. How? By making other people, enslaved people, grow it and harvest it and then cook it and then feed it to me and then clean it up. You don't have to do dishes, right? I mean, I don't know how much time would I have to be working on expanding the reach of the Kagro in the Morning Show if, well, for one thing, if Scott Anderson were enslaved. Yes. No, we don't need that. He's practically enslaved as it is. But if they were doing the dishes around here, if they were cleaning up the breakfast dishes, making breakfast, what if I could roll out of bed, closer to showtime and have people, buffing my nails and, powdering my wig? Do I need that? Probably don't need, it's radio. Don't need the wig. But anyway, today's New York Times story, very interesting. Another look at the relationship between the founders and their enslaved. Lots of which is coming to light these days. All the evidence was always there, and I will say this, as much as they did not bring it to the fore, the historians of the past had the good sense not to try to quash or destroy that evidence, thank God. And now we have it. And so here in history and, as it happens in this New York Times vertical, book news, because, of course, as you know, in order to have an impact on anything in this country, you must write a book about it. I don't know why we're still chained to that, but we are, and in some cases it's a good thing, because look at this book, In Search of the Slave Who Defied George Washington. It's a very interesting article for a number of reasons, not least of which being that they're talking about his enslaved household, but also... well, you really, maybe you do kind of have to read the article to get the point. And maybe we should. It is President's Day after all. Jennifer Schussler writes what amounts to this book review / historical review. And it's not super long, but it's really interesting. And well, I'll give you some sense of it here. Maybe we'll read through it. I don't know. The costumed characters, it begins, at George Washington's gracious estate here, Mount Vernon, that is, are used to handling all manner of awkward queries, whether about 18th century privies or the first president's teeth. Everyone loves to ask about that, and that's a story in itself. But when a visitor recently asked an African-American reenactor in a full skirt and headscarf if she knew Ona Judge. Ona? O-N-A? I hope that. How else would you pronounce it? Ona Judge. This woman didn't miss a beat. They were informed. They had full knowledge of who this person was. Judge's escape from the presidential residence in Philadelphia in 1796. Now, there was... Where did we stand in terms of slavery and freed people in Philadelphia in 1796? There was a free population, but you could still maintain slaves there. But anyway, this is, so you're answering as though, it's 1799, right? You're always perpetually in 1799 as a reenactor in Mount Vernon. So what about Ona Judge? Judge's escape from the presidential residence in Philadelphia, not Mount Vernon, in 1796 had been, quote, a great embarrassment to General and Lady Washington, the woman said, before offering her own view of the matter. Ona was born free, like everybody, she said. It was this world that made her a slave. It was, of course, the owner of this house. They made her a slave, but, they're being sensitive. Anyway, it's always 1799 at Mount Vernon, where more than 1 million visitors annually see the property as it was just before Washington's death, when his will famously freed all 123 of his slaves. We hear that a lot, right? And then I guess what's important to remind ourselves about reality, I don't mean to ruin your day, presidents, but... it is a matter of fact, as they state in the very next sentence, that liberation did not apply to Ona Judge, one of 153 slaves held by Martha Washington. So that's kind of an interesting all by itself. Washington, he freed all his slaves, granted when he died, and there are lots of people who say, well, could have freed him while you were alive, that would have been nice. But, realities of the day, he was a product of the times, yada, yada, all the excuses that go on, and I understand them. But still, the upshot of it was, he freed his slaves when he died. Yeah, well, didn't free Martha's slaves. Of course, that would have been a tough one, right? Like George Washington says, well, when I die, all my slaves will be freed. I'm a good man. Well, you could have freed them while you were alive. Yeah, but I'm not crazy. Well, then you could free at least all the slaves held by the Washington household. Yeah, but then brave, honorable George Washington is saying, well, free my slaves when I die, but screw my wife, free her slaves while she's still alive. And by the way, also, I mean, didn't he marry her because she was kind of a rich widow too? Like a lot of his fortune, back in the day, this was a standard practice, but a lot of his fortune was due to her family. I'm going to free your slaves. Like that wouldn't have gone over too big. But anyway, complicated. Yeah. But Ona Judge, that's the focus here. It turns out evaded the Washington's dogged, and this is interesting to me, and sometimes illegal efforts to recapture her. What an honorable guy. On the whole, maybe not. But also, we don't hear a lot about this. I freed my slaves, except for some of them I didn't free. And some of them I tried to recapture. And some of them I actually did that illegally. Illegally. George Washington? I cannot tell a lie. I broke the hell out of that law. I don't know. Maybe he didn't really think so. Interesting. So now I'm intrigued, right? Judge evaded the Washington's dogged and sometimes illegal efforts to recapture her and would live quietly in New Hampshire for another 50 years, and yet never somehow a member of the state legislature there. Now her story and the challenge it offers to the notion that Washington somehow transcended the seamy reality of slaveholding is having its fullest airing yet. And that's really the basic gist of what I wanted to bring to you with this article. I don't know. It being President's Day, there's a good excuse for reading through the rest of it. But let me just leave it at that for now, just in case there are some other super important things that we really have to get to. But I wanted to put out there that, yes, there's a story that goes deeper than, he freed all his slaves. So although that wasn't the greatest thing in the world, it was still pretty good. It was. But there was also some that he wasn't that interested in freeing. Although I'm very intrigued, and I would like to, if I can get to it, read through the rest of this so that I can find out, well, what did he do that was illegal? Or possibly illegal. I'm a little curious about that. But it's Monday, and there's an awful lot that we have to bring to your attention. And I guess alongside that which Greg mentioned in Wisconsin, there is also interesting news that's of a piece from nearby Michigan. I'll say this, though. I'll point this out, and I'll point to this article so everyone can go and read it. I picked up a ProPublica article about the Wisconsin gerrymandering issues. That might be of some interest to supplement your reading about it. Wisconsin picks new legislative maps that would end years of GOP gerrymandering. Under legal pressure to address Wisconsin's Swiss cheese, in quotes there, and oddly shaped districts, the legislature approved redrawn maps that promise to create a new dynamic in a state known for its pivotal role in national politics. That's an interesting overview of the issue, and we've done it really in reverse here. I almost would have preferred to have started with this overview and then gotten into the nitty-gritty details of it with Greg over, it's not really all that great, and it is actually kind of complicated, and maybe they didn't really do the best job possible in eliminating the gerrymandering of the districts as envisioned by Republicans, given that we might end up being handed by Republicans and yet another plan, just less terribly gerrymandered. And every step in the right direction is good news, that's to be sure. Anyway, I thought perhaps you might be interested in reviewing that, but I wanted to hold that up as an example of new winds of change blowing in some of our Midwestern states alongside this piece from The Nation out of Michigan. John Nichols tells us that Michigan just became the first state in 6 decades to scrap an infamous anti-union law. That's the old right to work, the horribly named, although brilliantly brilliantly portrayed by the other side. Right to work law. Democrats empowered by voters in 2022, where they actually did redraw the maps and reclaim the majority rule, really, in Michigan, overturned a right to work law as part of a sweeping pro-labor agenda that's a model for other states. Now, I've got some other notes coming in here from Greg that I wanted to check in on. Well, looks like word is out on what's going to happen in Wisconsin. Alexander Schur tweeting here, new Democratic Governor Tony Evers signs his maps into law today, so now we know what he's going to do, dramatically shifting Wisconsin's political landscape in a move that jeopardizes Republicans' control of both chambers for the first time in over a decade. Hallelujah. So now we know what he's decided to do. And then something new here, screen grab. Is this a statement from Evers' office or something? 1, I'm done turning double plays for the Cubs. And 2, this is a great day for Wisconsin and there is much to celebrate. We're not going to stop here. I and we are going to continue our fight for a fair, independent, and nonpartisan redistricting process for Wisconsin. If the people of Wisconsin vote to send Democratic majorities to Madison this November, I'll tell you right now, one of the first orders of business in our first 100 days together will be enacting a fair, independent, and nonpartisan redistricting system in Wisconsin. Again, interesting tack here. I mean, you kind of have to understand why he's driven this way. But remember that it assumes a lot to say that nonpartisan redistricting is the fair response to Republican gerrymandering. It is and it isn't. Like, in one sense, you might say, well, if the state was controlled for decades by partisan Republican minorities that really disguised themselves as majorities, wouldn't the fair thing be to swing the pendulum back and let Democrats control things for several decades as well? On the other hand, you might say, well, if there were really fair elections and fair districts, it may actually be the case that Democrats would control things for decades anyway, so what's the difference? Why not also do it from a justifiable position? But it's an interesting philosophical question, a good political science question. Is the right answer to let Democrats gerrymander in their favor and lock in majorities of their own for several decades and thereby, quote unquote, balance things out? Or is it better, maybe it's better if you say, well, in the long term, it's better what if Democrats controlled for decades and there was no serious basis for complaint about how and why they were doing it? Well, that would be great. But of course, there's no chance that Republicans won't make those claims anyway. I guess that's an interesting thing, right? That's one of the things you have to keep in mind is if you did it fairly from the standpoint of now the districts are fair and yet Democrats are winning them all the time, would that make a difference to partisan Republicans who do things like say, well, let's frame Biden for having taken bribes from Ukraine when he didn't, and just getting a false witness to swear that they did, and then we'll take it to the level of actually trying to impeach him in the House of Representatives? Or these are people who say, what, we lost the presidential election? No, we didn't. Watch this. I'm going to forge electoral college certificates and send them to Washington and see if we can't convince the vice president to pretend that he thinks they're real. I don't know why you would assume that people like that would say, well, we're losing elections, but they're fair elections, so what are you going to do? They're not going to accept that. But that doesn't mean that that two wrongs, what they don't make. Although, what sometimes they make in effect anyway. Anyway, underlying fairness. I don't know. We say we're into it. So here we are. All right. Well, what about anti-union laws? Let's read a little bit about that because that's news. And you might not have had a chance to catch up on that one. For the first time in almost 60 years, a state has formally overturned a so-called right-to-work law, clearing the way for workers to organize new union locals, collectively bargain, and make their voices heard at election time. After all, isn't that what all of this anti-gerrymandering work is about? This week, Michigan finalized the process of eliminating a decade-old right-to-work law, which began with the shift in control in the state legislature from anti-union Republicans to pro-union Democrats following the 2022 election. You have some fair elections, Democrats win them. This moment has been decades in the making, and that's true, declared AFL-CIO Michigan President Ron Bieber, I will say like Justin, is that how he pronounces it? By standing up and taking their power back at the ballot box and in the workplace, workers have made it clear Michigan is and always will be the beating heart of the modern American labor movement. All right. In addition to formally scrapping the anti-labor law on Tuesday, Michigan also restored prevailing wage protections for construction workers, expanded collective bargaining rights for public school employees, and restored organizing rights for graduate student research assistants at the state's public colleges and universities. But even amid all these wins for labor, it was the overturning of the right-to-work law that caught the attention of unions nationwide. Hi everybody, it's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Okay, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Net Roots Radio. Had a little bit of a late re-entry here, but we left off in the middle of learning about Michigan's reversal of the right-to-work law. Now a little bit of a history lesson about why that's so important. John Nichols sums it up for us here. Starting in the formerly segregated states of the South, where such laws, right-to-work laws, were rapidly enacted around the end of World War II, to thwart the Congress of Industrial Organizations Operation Dixie campaign, which was designed to organize multiracial unions across the region. This most destructive form of anti-labor legislation was later adopted in western states where mining unions had historically been strong, and finally spread in the 2010s to the industrialized heartlands of the Great Lakes region. Now the tide has begun to turn, beginning in a state with a rich labor history, and that's got the attention of union activists and working class people nationwide. As of today, Michigan is no longer a right-to-work state, announced the Teamsters Union in social media postings that featured a party hat and confetti. The Service Employees International Union, SEIU, celebrated the news as a big win, tweeting, after a decade of organizing and voting for change, Michigan workers just officially won the repeal of the state's so-called right-to-work law. You know, it was a brilliant framing thing for the Republicans who favored it. Right to work. Well, everyone wants to work, and you need to have the right to work. Yes, you do. But that's not what this is actually about. But it was just, they, adopted a name that was supposed to make it sound like something interesting to you, but it really was to your detriment. Anyway, this is the power we have when we unite at work, in the streets, and at the ballot box, even despite the fantastic framing that the other side was able to steal. At a time when the labor movement is showing renewed vigor and notching a string of high-profile victories, including last year's successful strike by the United Auto Workers Union against the Big Three car makers, the historic UPS contract victory by the Teamsters, the SAG-AFTRA strike, and in their win in the struggle over the abuses of AI technology in particular, and the future of work in general, and the explosion of grassroots union organizing at workplaces across the country, the overturning of Michigan's right-to-work law, and the implementation of a sweeping pro-union agenda provides tangible evidence of how much has changed in recent years for workers and their unions. And yeah, kind of included, wrapped up in all of that. I would say glossed over, except for they don't intend to gloss over it. They just assume you've been following their reporting all along. When they say grassroots union organizing, thinking of the organizing successes that they've had in, like in the fast food industry, which was historically resistant to unionization, areas that were previously banned from unionization or were otherwise, for other reasons, perhaps ununionized, like we mentioned earlier, graduate students working at the state universities or any university really, but particularly at the state universities, and also like student athletes organizing, interestingly enough, generating all this revenue for their institutions and not only not getting any of the share of it, and maybe that was never necessarily appropriate, but certainly that there should be some benefit to them, or at least a better sharing of the revenues, perhaps. I don't know. But at any rate, lots of advances in recognizing the rights of the people whose work actually generates the vast majority of this income, and saying, this needs to be better distributed, or at least they have to have the right every once in a while to actually be able to flex their muscles and demand change. So anyway, back to the prepared thoughts from John Nichols here. If there was a low point for the American labor movement in recent decades, there's a good case to be made that it came in 2012 when Michigan adopted the right to work law that had been promoted by wealthy and corporate-friendly Republican Governor Rick Snyder and approved by a Republican-controlled state legislature. The anti-labor legislation historically associated with southern states was now on the books in the state where Depression-era sit-down strikers helped give birth to the powerful United Auto Workers, and where unions had, from the 1930s onward, done a better job of organizing than almost anywhere else in the country. The implementation of Michigan's right-to-work law came shortly after Indiana, also a historically strong union state, enacted a similar measure, and shortly before another Great Lakes manufacturing state, Wisconsin, did the same. The movement to undermine the ability of workers to organize and collectively bargain was on the march in this period after Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker, with support from right-wing donors such as the Koch brothers, attacked public sector unions in a high-profile 2011 struggle. Republican politicians like Mitt Romney, the party's 2012 presidential nominee, were promising to fight for right-to-work laws nationwide. In the U.S. Senate, Kentucky Republican Rand Paul would eventually attract 30 co-sponsors for his National Right to Work Act. Mr. Leave Everybody Alone because I'm a libertarian, huh? In the mid-2010s, 27 states had right-to-work laws on the books. But then, as a new generation of workers embraced the Fight for 15 organizing to raise wages, and campaigns to sign up workers at Starbucks and Amazon began to take off, the corporate-sponsored crusade to enact right-to-work measures stalled. New Hampshire's legislature blocked a proposed right-to-work law in 2017 and again in 2021, despite the fact that the measure was promoted by Republican Governor Chris Sununu. And in 2018, Missouri voters rejected a right-to-work referendum by 67 to 33. Not that their state legislature cared a great deal, of course, but they might have had to live with that one. Preventing anti-union legislation from being enacted and implemented is one thing, however. Actually overturning an existing law is something else altogether. But that's what happened in Michigan. After 2022 voting saw the re-election of Governor Gretchen Whitmer, a labor ally, and thanks to the overturning of gerrymandered legislative district maps that had favored the GOP, sounds familiar, right? The election of Democratic majorities in the state House and state Senate, and for the first time in 4 decades, the Democrats controlled all the major levers of power in Michigan, and they used them to implement a sweeping pro-labor agenda. They didn't say, let's do it incrementally. They didn't say, well, now we have to tack to the center. That is important. That was a significant shift for Michigan, to be sure, but it was also an indication of what could be done in other states across the Great Lakes region and nationwide. Michigan Democrats took full control of the state government for the first time in 40 years, and they used that power to repeal the state's right-to-work law, explained a delighted former U.S. Secretary of Labor, Robert Reich, who added, "This is why we have to show up for our state and local elections." There you go. Just thought I'd throw that one out there for you, for everyone to consider. A good example of, promising and delivering on things. How interesting is that? Okay, let's see. Got to clean things up here in Pocket and get us back on track with things to share for you. While we're in Michigan, and it's been a while since we had Michigan check in, and maybe we'll be hearing some more at some point in the near future from Rosalind McGregor, but I'm sure this was on her radar because this made national news and people were talking about it. Reported here by the Daily Beast, and let me reload this so I can get the byline correct. Kate Briquelet, maybe? Briquuelet. Well, at any rate, she reports this news under the headline, Michigan GOP representative, one of the state legislators, doubles down on a racist tweet. We missed the initial story of the racist tweet, but don't worry, because these guys will always double down eventually. Here's the story. Since Michigan Republican lawmaker Josh Shriver, another Josh, this one much less worthy than Shapiro, but same consonant sound here at the beginning of the name, Shriver, not Shapiro. Since Michigan Republican lawmaker Josh Shriver shared a racist conspiracy theory online last week, almost certainly great replacement theory, right? He wasted no time doubling down on his rhetoric, even after losing his state House committee and staff as a result. Yes, they actually brought consequences to bear there, and with the agreement, I think, of his own Republican party there, but of course under the direction of the Democratic majority, he was actually stripped of his committee assignments and most of his staff funding for being such a racist jackass. So that's pretty cool. Where are we here? All right. So since he doubled down, he's wasted since he was in trouble and punished, he wasted no time in doubling down. Ready? I'm a white rapper and most conservative voting representative in Michigan, Representative Shriver, who rhymes about his voting record and Jesus, wrote on Wednesday on Twitter. And, they call it something else now. I guess it was only a matter of time before I was falsely labeled a racist. Sure, why not? In another post, the 31-year-old declared, I'm a Christian, not a racist. Uh-oh, Christians, watch out. I've worked in inner city schools with autistic children, he continued, and so therefore you can never be a racist. Inner city, that means, yeah. Some politicians refuse to go near those communities. I love to go there and protest them. I go anywhere God leads me. One Twitter user replied, self-immolation is a sight to behold. Someone get this guy in touch with a PR firm ASAP. Anyway, the backlash began after Shriver reposted an image from alt-right provocateur Jack Posobiec about the Great Replacement, an anti-Semitic narrative claiming Jewish people are behind a plot to replace white populations with non-white immigrants. In recent years, the conspiracy theory inspired mass violence in Buffalo, El Paso, Pittsburgh, and elsewhere. And as you know, things are going great right now. The non-white populations of America and the world are super pro-Jewish. Okay, well, it's a great plan. It's not happening, so don't worry about it. And the theory is stupid, and it's also a grand unifying theory of racism for the right, regardless of any facts on the ground. Well, I hate all of those people, so let's just lump them all into the same theory. On Wednesday, Shriver issued an official statement on Michigan House of Representatives letterhead referring to a racist plan, he's going to call other people racist, a racist plan to replace whites with non-whites through illegal immigration, to irreversibly warp America's demographics, voting citizens, and national identity to keep power in the hands of a godless regime. And lots of people doing their best to actually giving scholarly debunking lately of the Great Replacement theory. Although, it's so foolish on its face, it's hardly worth all the trouble. But it is worth pointing out, that would be even if it were true, what a long play that would be, right? They're bringing in illegal immigrants because they tend to vote Democratic. Well, one, illegal immigrants don't vote. For one thing, they're in hiding. Legal immigrants very often also don't vote because they can't, because they're not citizens yet, and it takes them years and years and years in order to become naturalized citizens, and then finally and only then be afforded the right to vote, despite the fact that they would have lived in and contributed to the welfare of this country for years on end. They'd have no control over the political direction of their lives because, reasons. Anyway, and then thirdly, of course, also a lot of those immigrant communities don't really vote all that heavily Democratic, actually, sort of, maybe almost. Didn't we just discuss that about the Rio Grande Valley in Texas? Overwhelmingly, overall, Democratic in their leanings, but increasingly Republican in their voting. And so anyway, the real point is, no, you don't just get brought in and are instantly converted into a voter. That's just not the way it happens. So they have to invent a second phase of the conspiracy in which, no, they really do. They're all cheating and voting, and Democrats are looking the other way. They're not. They're not casting ballots. They're just not. Anyway, he goes on to then say, this is an anti-white agenda. No one is racist for talking about it. Democratic Representative Jason Hoskins introduced a resolution that morning condemning the use of racist language by lawmakers. It passed 98-5, with 4 members of the House's far-right Freedom Caucus joining Shriver with no votes, but you still see 98-5. Meanwhile, outside of the state capitol, someone rented a truck with a billboard supporting Shriver and warning the invaders are coming under a photo of a throng of people. You know how it is with people when they throng. It's unclear who had commissioned the display. Hoskins told the Daily Beast he presented the resolution because of the racist conspiracy theories that have inspired mass shootings across this country and across the world. I felt it very important as a person of color and a queer person, in case you needed additional reason, to really say, you even mentioning a racist conspiracy theory puts my life in danger. My colleagues of color in danger. Puts people of color across the state in danger. I don't know why he's doing this, Hoskins added. I don't know what the end game is here. I hope he realizes this is such a bad thing and there's so many people with valid concerns. Shriver, a former autism clinic supervisor, maybe he wasn't very good, but I don't know, who once boasted of being named Michigan's most conservative lawmaker, didn't return messages seeking comment. He did, however, appear to capitalize on the controversy during Prosabiech's show on Thursday, playing the role of political martyr and plugging a newly created website. Indeed, Shriver has amassed a few thousand followers since the firestorm began. No one is ever going to run to the right of me, Shriver said, as though that were, praiseworthy. If the Republican establishment wants to oppose me in this election, then I'll defend the seat that God called me to, and I need your help. No, you don't. You've got God. You don't need my help. Visiting joshshriver.com is one way to start that process. Sure. I'm sure God needs a website. Shriver then took aim at Democratic House Speaker Joe Tate for disciplining him and disenfranchising his 90,000 constituents. Tate cut Shriver's $132,000 office allotment, barring him from making even the smallest of expenditures for things like photocopying, and reassigned his staff and booted him from a committee. The Speaker has not shared a timeline for the restoration of Shriver's funds, so maybe there isn't one. The freshman lawmaker, whose Substack describes him as, quote, a former kindergarten teacher, might even be true, I don't know, ran a mostly self-funded campaign in 2022 with all that kindergarten money. He also claimed to be a field organizer for Trump's 2020 campaign and the founder of a grassroots group in his Detroit exurb of Oxford. It's called the Klan. During the Prosobiec segment, Shriver announced that he was, quote, currently an autism clinician. Maybe yes, maybe no. Despite state records showing his license expired in November, but in the Rand Paul model, who needs licenses? You can just make up your own, right? And in the Republican mold, why not also forge electoral college certificates while you're at it? Shriver did not return an email from the Daily Beast asking about his lapsed license. Watchdogs also recently challenged Shriver's claim that he was an assistant coach for Oxford High's JV boys basketball team. Last week, he posted a photo of his hairy leg. What? With teen players in the background. Gotta play basketball with my boys, he wrote. But you don't have to. You actually have to coach it, if you're a coach at all. And then hairy leg. All right. I guess it's better than waxed leg. But the school district says it has no record of Shriver working there. I actually have that, but I didn't feel like pressing the button. In an email, Oxford Community School Superintendent Dr. Vicky Markovich told the Daily Beast Representative Josh Shriver is not working for Oxford Community Schools, and to my knowledge, he has never been an employee of the district. It's a George Santos situation all over again, except this time with a Nazi Hitler Klansman. Anyway, his wife, Gabby Shriver, who should probably run away, who is, a goalkeeper with the Detroit City Football Club. How do you like that? Is, in fact, varsity girls soccer coach at the school, according to the athletics website. On Twitter, Shriver has championed his wife's athletic career. She should champion it herself and lose this dude. Writing, supporting her has shown me how important it is to protect women's sports. That's, of course, going to be his entree into anti-trans activism. The scripture-quoting legislator also said he, quote, would be most deeply honored to be killed as a martyr for Christ. All right. And then he shared a haiku, because it's important as a Christian to do haiku, on the migrant invasion. Oh, anyway, then he called divorce a plague. He's going to probably be participating in that plague pretty soon. And frequently calls for conservative actor Tim Allen to run for governor, which would be a plague in its own right. Then there's his rap videos. Oh, my God. My name is Josh Shriver. I don't even... Do I want to try to put a beat to this? No. My name is Josh Shriver. I represent you. I came to spit fire. Let me tell you what I do. He rhymes while walking through the chamber doors for the song Check Me Out. I do the best I can. Trust in God and not in man. That is some good rapping. And, of course, if you're walking through the chamber doors, probably not legal usage of the floor situation. In the track, the conservative code, but he spells it out. It's with the conservative CODE. He dances in the bed of a pickup truck before an American flag mural with the words, "In God We Trust." I swore a sacred oath, so help me G-O-D. G-O-D, help me G-O-D. That's not a rhyme. That's just saying the same thing over and over again. One of the plagues of white rap. Anyway, he's definitely known in spite of his freshman status, Hoskins told the Daily Beast. Part of the reason is he's simply because he votes no on everything. Or, as they say in rap world, he votes N-O. Yo, 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 N-O. I don't know. That's that's not actually part of the article, but I fooled you. It really could have been, right? That could be one of his stupid lyrics. Despite a mass shooting at Oxford High in 2021, by the way, Shriver has rejected stricter gun laws, voted against a bill that stopped domestic abusers from owning firearms for 8 years. The bill passed anyway, and Governor Gretchen Whitmer signed it into law in November, despite his heroic stance against it. But then again, to be fair, he did vote against the stricter gun laws, even though there was a mass shooting at Oxford High. But do we really expect him to vote for those gun measures, given that, well, actually he doesn't work at Oxford High School, even though he claims he does. So what can I tell you? Maybe not that surprising, but also, he's pro-guns. Shriver has also voted against legislation banning child marriage in case Gabby leaves him. He wants to be able to get a child. prohibiting sexual contact under the pretext of medical treatment, which is important because he's a clinician, designating Juneteenth as a state holiday, he's against that as well, and making race-based discrimination based on someone's hair texture or style illegal. These bills were also signed into law last year, despite his freedom-loving objection. And when he and 4 Freedom Caucus members rejected a bipartisan bill to close a loophole in the state's marital rape law, look out, Gabby, Democratic Representative Lori Pohutsky, the legislation's sponsor, tweeted that the 5 no votes were, quote, extremely disturbing. And they are. Sam Inglot, executive director of Progress Michigan, said Shriver may not be a power player within the Republican apparatus, but he belongs to a small but growing extremist faction of the state GOP. Representative Shriver is part of the most far-right cohort of state Republican lawmakers that this state has ever seen, he told the Daily Beast. So, while he may be more bold with what he's saying, the trend of far-right rhetoric and MAGA-level extremism in the Republican side of the legislature is very prominent. You don't have to look any further than the fact that House Minority Leader Matt Hall has been silent up to this point. Ignot, is that a typo? I don't know. The spelling was different. But anyway, because of the type of rhetoric that Shriver is espousing should be very easy and very quickly condemned. But I guess the Republicans not actually all that helpful, at least in speaking out, though they did provide the votes to condemn him. Anyway, the fact is that he's sitting on his hands, remaining silent while folks like Speaker Joe Tate are taking action. I think that speaks volumes about what Republican legislators in office and their leadership prioritize right now. Few Republican state lawmakers have publicly denounced Shriver's great replacement ideology, which isn't the only time he's dipped into extremism. As Right Wing Watch has pointed out last fall, Shriver seemed to brandish the one-finger salute of white supremacist Nick Fuentes and his America First fanboys during a local TV appearance. Afterward, he posted a screen grab of himself with the words, "Autumn is my favorite," along with the hashtags Christ is King and America First. Fuentes, banned from Twitter, reportedly used a burner account called Autumn Groiper, and everyone remembers who the Groipers were. So whatever Autumn Groiper means, I don't know, but it inspired this douchebag to say he loved autumn. So, okay, I don't know. It's a weird thing to say out of nowhere. Republican Arizona State Senator Wendy Rogers, another cuckoo bird we've heard about before, a far-right supporter of Fuentes, has also repeatedly praised Shriver and called him Michigan's voice for MAGA. In January, Shriver joined a Twitter Spaces conversation wherein he argued gender-affirming care should be banned regardless of a person's age. I guess, do we really even care what his rhetoric is there? Just want to add that to the list of charges against him. He's also used this platform to beef with the Satanic Temple. That should be fun. Posting a thank you card that he received from the group and falsely accusing state Democratic legislators, I guess, of partnering with them. Sure, why not? After alerting our nation to the partnership between Michigan Democrats and the sadistic Satanists, the evil duo sent me and my wife a creeper card, he fumed. No, not mail. Enraged by the temple's Yule goat stationed outside the Capitol last December, Shriver vowed on radio to introduce legislation removing tax-exempt status from non-theistic churches. It's theistic. Anyway, he added that he'd craft a policy making pornography illegal, too. We can get them all at once, I guess. God called me to represent him in government regardless of personal expense, Shriver told Posobiec on Thursday. And so for me right now, to be going through what I'm going through joyfully is something that God is able to give us as believers. Well, the Detroit Women's Football Club is the one paying for this one, it sounds like. We need to be representing God in government to reflect his excellency and his beauty in our communities. Why am I reading his garbage at this point? I don't know. So he's a Looney Tunes. I just want to sort of put him on your radar. It was a story we hadn't covered, something we need to catch up with just in case, I don't know, he rears his head at some point during the election. We'll know who we're dealing with and what we need to do about it. Okay. Many other things that are still hanging out there, but luckily we have a full week ahead of us during which we can get to any number of stories that we missed today, including Some happily more clear-cut entries from Marcy Wheeler over at emptywheel.net, and one in which perhaps we can share tomorrow, in which she explains how Merrick Garland mistook a Trump hitman for a career prosecutor, talking about Robert Hur there. And that issue becoming clearer and clearer each day. But she's got the details that we haven't seen, if not reflected at all, certainly not expounded upon in the mainstream traditional media, about just how involved Hur was during the Trump administration with upholding their strident politicization of the Department of Justice, and her focus in this piece, which I hope we'll get to perhaps tomorrow, discussing exactly what had to be ignored about his background in order for Merrick Garland and the higher-ups in the Biden DOJ to continue to allow him to serve as special prosecutor, a special counsel investigating their own man. It's really rather remarkable. Okay, all of that, plus, I guess, more empty wheel exposition on larger, more sweeping issues. Well, you know, these are the important things that she's got her eye on, and she's got all the details, but also a high-level picture as well. Another interesting read, perhaps, for later in the week. But her emails, how Trump trained the GOP to hate the rule of law. And this is just part one of I don't know how many, but interesting overarching theme that certainly fits in well with the way we treat things here on this show. Now, though, time for Justice Putnam to treat things the way he treats them.
NetworksRadio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
And what a treat it is. The West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy comes up next right here on Netroots Radio. Let's see what he's got on top here. Let's see. The dumb as rocks Republicans destroyed their own investigation. I guess he's going to be getting into this look at Robert Hur's view, plus, of course, the effort to frame Biden for impeachment. Next.